Hey, hello everyone. I hope you're thriving on this wonderful Wednesday, and thank you for joining us, the League of Women Voters, for our 104th birthday rally and panel, and then closing out. So, before we kind of get into the content of today and kind of uplift some of the themes that we're hoping for, I kind of wanted to give space to welcome you all, but then also to kind of ground us or support the grounding of us in this moment. So, obviously, 104 years behind us, and hopefully 104 plus years ahead of us. And when we're talking about that time, I think we're balancing that next generation of voters. So what does it mean for voters who are new to the ballot? It's the first year they're old enough, or the first year that they're connected and reinterested in voting, versus commemorating those of our organization, of our communities who paved that path behind us, for which without we would not be here. And then also talking about how we as a league in this 104th year are continuing to adapt and evolve for our democracy's needs. Because as more people are incorporated, whether that's just through civil rights amendment, but also naturalization, the needs of our democracy change, who we're speaking to change, who we have to support and then uplift change. So also in this moment, as we commemorate, acknowledging what has to shift and that's ultimately rising to the challenge, because that's how you get 104 years under your belt as an organization. You continually rise to the challenge. And then most importantly, emphasizing that sense of intergenerational bridge building. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today with that young voter analysis and that thematic view. Because when we're talking about our democracy, sometimes we know that we have buy-in, we know that we've been voting for several years, we know what it means for us to vote for our local communities, not just at that national presidential level, but at that school board level, at that alderman level. But when we're trying to bring in those new members of democracy, understanding where they're coming from, their understanding of this country, their understanding of their needs and wants in that political field, and together coming and acknowledging that we might have different interests, different perspectives, different identities, but when we intersect them, we create a stronger whole. So that's kind of just some of the themes that we're hoping to cover and uplift today. But in addition to that note that I said about grounding, I actually want to hand it off to our LWS board president, Sonia Irwin, who's going to speak more about what that means and as we call ourselves to this space, what we're hoping to accomplish.
Thank you, Nile. I am trying to actually come back on camera and that button seemed to, oh, there we go. It was out. All right. Thank you, Nile. And good morning, League members, volunteers, and supporters. So as Nile said, my name is Sonia Irwin, and I serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of the United States. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for joining us to commemorate our 104th birthday. So 2 weeks ago, the League and the voting rights community lost our beloved Dr. Deborah Ann Turner, who was the 20th president of the League of Women Voters. As the vice president, I then assumed the role of the president of LWVUS and the chair of LWV Education Fund in accordance with our bylaws. A devoted advocate for women's rights and voting rights, Dr. T was one of a kind, working tirelessly to create a more equal and just democracy. I was honored to serve with her in our mission to empower voters and defend democracy. To honor her on this day, please join me in observing a moment of silence. Thank you. As Dr. Turner would have said, we must keep on keeping on. And today we come together to lift the voices of all voters in this important presidential election year. We are facing a year with many challenges: voter suppression laws and gerrymandering that makes it harder for voters to make their voices heard in communities across the country. Mis and disinformation are on the rise, and it will require all of us to become trusted messengers in our communities to ensure that every voter has the information to exercise their right to vote. Our leagues are ready and equipped to work together and tackle these challenges using vote411.org to make sure voters have what they need to make their voting plans. Our Democracy Truth Project to combat mis and disinformation, and League in Action to activate our communities to get out the vote. Today, we will hear from some inspiring young voters and the powerful work being done by leagues and partners to register, organize, and mobilize young and new voters all over the country. On our 104th birthday, we remember where we come from, owning a past that is not perfect, and looking forward towards the future of our league and our country, building a democracy that truly reflects the spirit and energy of our young voters. Our amazing panel today features young voters and leaders in our voting rights community doing very important work. We will hear from them about the challenges we are facing this election cycle and how we can overcome them together. Get ready to be inspired, energized, and motivated as we continue to commemorate our 104th birthday with our fellow members, our family and friends, our partners, and our communities. Now back to you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, that grounding. And just to reemphasize, Dr. T was phenomenal. And she's a giant among giants, and we do miss her. But holding that space and kind of going into this conversation, I'd love it if our panelists could kind of go off camera, not go off camera, you're already off camera, but go on camera so that I could introduce you before we get into this wonderful conversation. So first up, we have Van Freeman. He is the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Young Invincible. He has extensive experience in advancing both minority businesses and diversifying workforce initiatives. He has held key roles in the Aerospace Industries Association and the DC Department of Employment Services. Van is a graduate of Morehouse and Southern University Law School, and he resides in DC with his family, who he says in his bio that he's a fan of, which is always nice. So next we have Bianca Rosales, a community organizer, an activist, an educator, and the current associate director of partnerships for Student Learn, Student Vote. She also works for NARL, Pro-Choice America in Washington, D.C. So we're fighting for voting rights, we're fighting for student rights, we're fighting for reproductive health, all of it's intertwined. She held a BS in Communication Studies and Human Relations from the University of Texas in Austin. And then finally, but not least, right, we have Jada Hunter, a student from Orlando, Florida, majoring in law, politics, and society with a minor in human development and family science at Samford College in Alabama. Jada has been actively involved in various activities such as the Micah Fellows, which is a dope honors institution on her campus, student government, her very own league, League of Women Voters on campus, and her sorority, Phi Mu. She has completed multiple internships in the legal field and is passionate about pursuing a law degree specializing in juvenile law after graduation. So I'm very excited about this conversation. I think we're bringing together a lot of interesting voices. I think I'll actually kick it off with Van with this first question, which is, what are some of the key challenges you've encountered when you're trying to mobilize and support young voters, and how have you addressed them within your organization?
The main thing with engaging young voters and mobilizing them is making sure we talk to the issues that matter to them, identifying what those issues are, and those really have been around mental health, the environment, jobs, and equity. Making sure we talk to how we can change those issues once they vote and how their vote really matters in changing those issues. If they don't understand how it relates to them directly, individuals on the street, at the state, local, and federal level, how each one of these votes matters, it's hard to get them to mobilize because then they don't understand, well, why am I voting? Why am I voting for my local mayor? Why am I voting for the local city council? Well, do you understand that it impacts your unemployment insurance? Do you understand that it impacts your access to health care, your access to where jobs are? It affects all of these things. But if you don't go vote, then you don't have a voice in that process. And I think it's a matter of explaining to them how that vote turns into their voice in the overall shaping of what their world looks like. So that's how we talk to the issues, and mobilizing them. It's really explaining it to them, really being able to have a good conversation about how these complex policy issues can really be boiled down to simple things that affect their lives on a daily basis.
Thank you so much for emphasizing that. And, kind of leading into that with Bianca, I'd love to hear Student Learn, Student Vote, how your approach has been.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to thank you, Nile, for inviting me to represent the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. We're really honored about this partnership and be able to work with you all to engage more young voters all across the country. To answer this question, I want to share a little bit of context of how the coalition functions. So we are the largest national network dedicated to increasing student voter engagement on institutions of higher education, my apologies. And so as a coalition, as a national hub, we are a group of nonprofit partners at the national, state, and local level, campus partners, and other groups that are committed to providing students with the access, knowledge, and confidence to be able to vote in every single election every single year. And so I share that context because one consistent challenge that we see and hear about from our coalition partners that are on the ground doing this work is the disillusionment that students and young voters are facing when it comes to wanting to engage in our democracy, especially in the face of like the constant barrage of the national news cycle. And so to sustain enthusiasm among young organizers, we really, as a coalition, emphasize highlighting local gains and the work of our local partners where we know the immediate impact is often most evident. And this year, we're placing a heightened focus on the why behind voter participation, particularly at the local level. So in addition to our usual provision of logistical and institutional support and resources that we offer our partners, we aim to underscore the significance of local engagement, hopefully providing a more compelling narrative to inspire and sustain the passion of young organizers by showing what is being accomplished, not just potentially being disparaged by what they're seeing at a national level, but what is actually happening on a daily basis that's impacting them on a daily basis. So that's one challenge. We also see another challenge of like information and resource overload. So again, we're trying to get as many resources and information to our young voters, and it can feel overwhelming. And so as a coalition, key to our success is collaboration. And that's why we coordinate our partners across the country so that we can streamline information and strategies. It's why strategic partnerships, such as our collaboration with the League of Women Voters, is so critical to reaching more and more young voters in a strategic and an intentional way.
No, I definitely agree with that emphasis on local elections, especially with people being so disillusioned with the national conversation at times. And, Jada, I'd be happy to have you speak on that question too, but kind of looping in some of that direct, because we're talking organization to young people. And now with the work that you do, we're talking young people to young people. In what ways do you think young people can be encouraged to stay civically engaged beyond just voting in elections? And what initiatives, not just that you've seen or do, but what you'd like to see, think allow us to undertake that long-term civic participation?
Yes, absolutely. I just first want to say thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Nile, and thank you to Sinai. I just am so grateful to be here talking to you all this morning. One of the things that I loved that both Bianca and Van emphasized are issues that speak to you directly. And I have the privilege of knowing what some of those issues are because the people that I get to work with are more of my peers than a population or a community that I'm looking on the outside in, which is such good work. But I am so grateful that I am in a space in my life where the people that I'm working with are peers. And one of the things that we found for Samford that has been important because we're in Alabama, because we're a private Baptist university, we have a lot of really interesting dynamics at play within our campus population, and specifically a lot of diversity in ideas in that might be different than what you would think young people as a monolith would vote for or would be civically engaged with. So I think one of the big things, getting back to your question, Nile, is looking at the population of young people that you can directly impact and building relationships with that group and seeing what they care about. Because honestly, there are a lot of issues that are regional for us. One of the things that we're talking a lot about is a bill in Alabama that's going to severely restrict the ability to get absentee ballots. This is really important for our campus community. A lot of our students would have to travel 3-4 hours on a Tuesday back home to vote. Alabama doesn't have early voting. So it's a really relevant issue for a lot of our student body. And I think that that's one of the things that keeps us civically engaged is looking at those local elections. But even more than just voting, we're lobbying and we're looking at specific legislation that those elected officials are pursuing and holding them accountable for those things.
No, absolutely. I think that there's a sense among young voters when we talk about the disillusionment is this lack of accountability. And I think sometimes it can be cynical to the point of inaccuracy, but you feel like if I don't vote, something bad happens. If I do vote, they say it's not going to happen, and then it happens. And what they said didn't happen, happened, right? So that's actually a really important dynamic in this that we have to really kind of bring up. But, kind of broadening it, and whomever wants to, get this question first, feel free, right? Is that given that diverse perspective and background of young voters that Jada was kind of hinting to, that we all are just implicitly hinting to because of our work, how do you ensure that your messaging resonates with that broad audience while still addressing important issues? Because, the conversation about AP African American history is not a conversation necessarily for everyone, but it is at the same time. So how do we make sure that Black students feel seen while also having that larger context? I guess is one of my examples, but go for it, Van.
Yes, first of all, thank you again for having me on here representing YI. And YI represents young adults between 18 and 35, and we focus on the youth voice and uplifting that voice and enhancing that experience so that they understand how that can shape policy. So when you talk about making sure everyone else is heard, we make sure that as we focus on issues like healthcare, higher ed, workforce, we allow everyone's voice to be heard in that and how that should shape it. So if you're talking about AP American history, you're talking about higher education or education in general, and what that means for everyone when you think about DE&I and being respected in your own space and being able to learn about history, all history. I mean, it's about, we're in Black History Month, and it's about American history. It's about understanding how history formed the country. If you don't know about it and you're ignorant of it, then you truly can't work to fix the problems. And those problems are perpetual. They continue to repeat themselves. So what you may have in one generation will happen in the next. So again, to your question of like, how do we make sure that all voices are heard, not just focusing on one area? We make sure we uplift that voice as to what the issue is and how it affects that specific policy. And then we shape it around, we look at how it can affect the overall policy of higher education or workforce. How does that play into the DEI conversation? We try to understand and relate that back to each and every other person that we engage with.
I think Bianca, you unmute. Thank you for that, Van. But I see Bianca, I think you unmuted.
Yeah, I think this is a really great point, Van, and it's a really great question, Nile. So yeah, as you mentioned, young people, they come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives. They're not a monolith, right? And nor are student voters. And so the second that young people begin to sense that a message or a messenger doesn't understand who they are or has made these inaccurate generalizations about them, that's when you lose all trust. And so at the coalition, our philosophy is all about offering the tools and resources for local leaders to empower them to speak genuinely and personally to communities that share their campus and community context. Because no one message can span the full diversity of our youngest voters. And again, that's bringing back the importance of local elections and speaking to local community issues, right, that are impacting them. So if there's one theme to our message, it's not really at the coalition any one issue. It's about empowerment. And that's why the SOSV theme this year is building power in numbers. So growing, bringing more people to the table, sharing more of our resources, more of our support so that we can scale our impact all across the country and reaching more student voters across the country. So.
Jada, let's talk about that localized conversation that you're having, right, with those young people in your campus space. Where do you think that might shift the messaging and how you approach it?
Yes, I feel like that teed me up perfectly. So thank you, Bianca. I love everything y'all said about the importance of giving opportunities is a central theme I heard. And I think that that's so important. One thing that we've been really committed to, and it may seem like a small thing, but it really has ripple effects. We have voting registration drives on campus every single month. And that literally is just two of us from our Samford affiliate league sitting at a table with two computers and asking people if they're registered to vote. And a lot of the time, the answer is no, I don't know. And we're able to use tools like Vote 411 to check, confirm their registration or help them re-register or help them get an absentee ballot. Truly, we're able to offer so many services because everything now, A, is online, and B, we're able to get students to be like, oh, I haven't thought about it. And I think giving students the opportunity to think about it, even for a second, is planting a seed in their minds that even if they're not able to stop at our table that day, they can go back, and they're noticing on Canvas that we use turbo votes at Samford. So they're noticing that, oh, I could register to vote. Was that what she was talking about earlier? Maybe I'll look into that. And I think that that's really important. Another thing that practically we do at Samford, because I think you guys spoke to the really broad overarching themes, but I think one of the practical things we do is a lot of educational events. Because I think in high school and middle school, we're not doing a great job of making sure students understand how our government works and helping them close the gap between what they think and what they've heard on the news and what they've heard on TikTok and Instagram. Because let's be honest, young people aren't scrolling through CNN every morning. We're looking on Instagram and we're seeing headlines and we're making conclusions based on that. And I'm speaking for myself too. I need to do a better job of checking my news sources because it's just so easy to coast. So we're trying to close that gap with young people at Samford. And then finally, one of the last things that we've done that's been really effective is we had a debate between our political groups on campus. We had them choose issues. We chose an issue that was nonpartisan so that we could just have discussions about these are things that are relevant to you. Why should we care about this? What do you think about this? What does maybe the party that you're affiliated with believe about this? So that we can help students not just make assumptions, but hear from students who are actually parts of those groups and understand. And after that debate, I'll just share one more anecdote. But after that debate, we had a student who was arguing for one side and one party. And she came up to the other debater who was arguing on the other side and said, you know, a lot of the things that you said, I hadn't really thought about. I think I agree with you more than what I was saying up there. And that's all. It was so worth it just for that one moment to help students really consider what they believed and why they believed what they did.
LOL, nutshell cooking. I'm loving this conversation. But okay, so I have one thing to say, and then I'm going to transition because some of what you said, Jada, is perfect lead into the next question. One is that we are going to have a short Q&A section. So for those of you who are watching on Facebook, I already see 1 or 2 questions in the chat, but if you continue to drop those, when we get to that, we'll try to answer as many as possible. But, you know, Jada, what I feel like you did really well is you emphasized the pitfalls of the digital space, so myth and disinformation, whether or not people are looking into those headlines, but then also the accessibility of I'm on my way to class, I can't stop, but I can QR code, and that keeps me in the conversation, right? So we're balancing that. So I think I'll kick it off with Bianca with this question. What do you see the role of technology being when you're talking about increasing youth voter turnout, engagement, and mobilization? And maybe how are you mobilizing and leveraging those digital platforms to reach young people effectively?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And Jada, thank you for sharing what you did about like social media, because it's very true, right? So, but in addition to social media, at the Coalition, we're also really into other types of online tools to reach student voters. So one example I can actually give is a tool that's created by the Ask Every Student initiative, which for those of you listening who may not be familiar with Ask Every Student, this is a national joint initiative that facilitates collaboration between campus leaders and nonprofit partners to help campuses, as the name suggests, ask every student to participate in the democratic process and achieve full student voter registration. And so AES, which is Ask Every Student for short, created this guide to help campus stakeholders integrate voter registration into their learning management system. So things like Canvas, Blackboard. I'm also a grad student at NYU, so we use Brightspace. And so that's one example of how campuses can reach students where they're at, right? Like students, as you mentioned, Nile, they're busy. Some of them are working full-time jobs, right? They're supporting their families. They're doing things. It makes it really difficult to go out of your way if you don't have a vehicle, if it's not accessible on your campus, and even if it is, still difficult to do things like register to vote. So when there are opportunities to meet them where they're at, like you suggested, Nile, that's really important, right? And so that's an example of something one of our programs created to help campuses be able to do that. But we also have a number of our partners that are creating really helpful virtual tools. Some of you may be familiar with Vote for Astra. They create tools to support relational organizing, really speaking to what we were talking about earlier, that it's important to speak directly to students and young people in general, understand where they're coming from, what's important to them. So relational organizing is a key tactic, and they have tools for that. We also have other partners in the coalition, such as Democracy Works and Rock the Vote. Jada mentioned a tool that they use for voter reg. That create these they have these voter registration portals, but they can also be used for education. Like you mentioned, Jada, is really important as well, the types of events around education and voter turnout. So those are just some examples of types of online digital platforms that we use, and we know that they're really important. So we're going to continue to invest and create those opportunities.
Wonderful, thank you. Van, I'd love to hand that question off to you.
As far as tools that we utilize, our main thing is around education. We have something called Story Hub, which allows individuals to tell their story about issues that impact them, so that we can uplift it and send it to members of Congress, so that whenever we go up the Hill and advocate about certain issues, whether it be healthcare, higher education, workforce, financial insecurities, just economic opportunity in general, we can then show that to members in their district to say that these are people actually in your district that are affected by the policies that you're talking about. So this year you have reauthorization of WIOA. You have other issues around court case around methylpristone, to where you want to educate members of Congress around, hey, let's deal with the regulation around how the FDA can use the regulatory authority. Being able to talk to people at the FDA about how these rulings can affect people in the jurisdictions that they have that they've issued regulation in. So being able to tell their stories and actually show them, not just saying, hey, this is from me or my opinion or these are facts, but actually give them those stories, changes their perception about how they should rule or how they should make decisions. So again, it's called Story Hub. We have it as connected to our website. So anyone on here can go online now, click on Story Hub and tell their story, narrate how things impact them in their daily basis. So whether it's AP history or whether it's student debt. I'm sure many people on here would like to talk about student debt. So we're in the process of negotiated rulemaking, and we're talking with the Department of Ed. And there's a whole comment period right now that's actually open to anyone on this call, actually, to where you can submit comment to the Department of Education, not just around student debt, but around mental health as well. Those are things that members of our coalition, we provide to them, but we keep them engaged. But also, again, we use Story Hub to tell the stories around how these things impact people.
No, absolutely. Jada, I would love to hear your thoughts on that digital space and organizing, because then we might transition to my last question / the Q&A, because I think they actually kind of interrelate a lot.
Yeah, I honestly love everything that Bianca and Van said. I don't have a lot to add, but if there are people who are listening right now who are interested in engaging young people and getting in those spaces, I would really encourage you to leverage the power of social media. I know I was kind of dogging on it earlier, but it is a double-edged sword like so many things, and it can be a tool for really a lot of good, especially in the communication sphere. We do an annual survey at Samford, and I think something like 70+% of our students primarily got notified of events that were happening via social media. So it's definitely a powerful tool. It is an effective tool for communication. Perhaps it has a little bit more room to grow when it comes to being to not spreading misinformation, but it is a powerful tool for communication.
Absolutely. And the joke I always make is that leagues got to start making TikToks. Like, listen, you got to lean in just a little bit, right? Yeah, this is, go for it, man. You got,
I was saying, not to be partisan, but the Biden administration decided to jump on there even after the overall government banned government use of TikTok.
I'm saying, you gotta read between the lines. But okay, this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you all so much for the time. I'm not ending it. I'm just transitioning into the Q&A from our confirmed questions. And I think I'm going to say one of the last questions that I had written out, but then kind of combine it with one of the first Q&As, because I think they ultimately are the same question with different tones. So the confirmed question was just, as advocates and organizers of young voter empowerment, mobilization, so on and so forth, what advice or insights would you offer to older generations seeking to better understand and collaborate with young people? And I think that's perfect, because one of the Q&A questions that we had, I want to make sure I'm direct quoting, not having it in front of me. Okay, here it is how can older voters best communicate with young voters? Is there trust or mistrust between generations? And I just think that's interesting, right? So I have my own thoughts about it, but I'll throw it to the floor first. Whatever part of that you want to hop onto. Okay, after you, Jada.
Sorry, I am so passionate about this question because I am so grateful for the mentorship that older generations have given to me. Dr. Ellen Buckner, who is probably listening right now, has been my mentor at the League of Women Voters of Greater Birmingham and Alabama since I was a freshman in college. And if it wasn't for her, I simply would not be sitting here talking to you all today. So getting involved and inserting yourself into spaces that maybe you're uncomfortable, I think is huge. She's a nursing professor at Samford. I am a political science student. There was no reason for us to interact other than she taught in my honors program. And she came alongside me, taught me about the league. She taught me about the history. And one of the things that has always stood out to me about her mentorship is she has never assumed that I know something or has thought I should know something. She has always been willing to teach me. So if that is the space that you're in and you're wanting to get involved in young voters, I would really encourage you to step back and understand that some of the assumptions you're making may not be quite as relevant for younger people anymore because we've changed so much in the last even decade, even 5 years. I mean, we just have changed at such a rapid pace that it's really difficult to consider what people refer to as common knowledge anymore. So that would be my recommendation. I think that there is so much room for intergenerational mentorship and help and all of that. And I think there are some things, she's not on here, so I don't want to speak for her, but I think she has previously said to me that there are things I have taught her too. So I would encourage you to step into it with an open mind and to not step into it with assumptions.
Van, I see that you unmuted, but I just want to add one thing real quick because I think, Jada, you spoke to it, but I feel like inter means directional, means dual. The way that you said you learned from her, she learned from you. And I think that this is not me talking even about the league, but intergenerational work in general is there is collaboration and then there's deference. And there's mutual respect and regard and a partnership and engagement. And then there's a sense of hierarchy. And so when we're talking about working with young people, are we saying we just want to tell young people the time and place and for them to show up? Or do we want to do grassroots, intentional work that requires them to be experts of their generation, of their field, who have final say and final decision making in what the outcome is? Because I think that a lot of times we're so excited around young people in the way that we're excited a lot of around other kind of passionate trigger words when it comes to political advocacy. But the DEI, the intention, the shifting of culture, all these multifaceted things that have to happen for us to create space, whether it's for middle schoolers in the educational context or college and university students or adults in the working class field, all these different intersections, it requires work and intention. And there's never going to be, other than being open-minded, engaged, and honest, a single answer that's going to work for every demographic of young people. And I think just being open to that fluidity allows you to do that work a lot better, a lot more consistently, and with much better results. But yeah, Van, go for it.
I think the underlying point for both of you, the mentorship and the engagement piece is, and this is one tool that I've used as an organizer way back in when I was organizing, is just listening. Like, listen to understand so that they can feel understood. We talk about student debt, and I've been probably beating that drum in a while. I've been beating that drum for 10 years or so. I beat the drum and I would send like articles of friends and I'd be like, do you see this law? Like, look at this law. It's in the law. And you're trying to explain it. And I'm just like, I just need you to listen to what I'm trying to tell you. Then you might understand the pain point that I have. And then if you can understand the pain point, you can help me address it. You might not have ever seen the pain point. You might not even feel my pain point. But if you don't listen, then you can't understand it and you can't help me resolve it. So for people in various generations, I think, and not just different generations, from different backgrounds, I think the main point is when you're trying to engage with someone and you're not in their shoes, listen to what they're experiencing and listen to their viewpoint. That's the best way to help you engage and understand and talk with them and figure out, as a political person on the other side trying to create a solution, whether it be in policy, how to solve their problem.
questions. I feel like we're all keying into that core of really like working with young people is just genuine relationship building. It's like relational organizing is essentially the call to action. Bianca, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great and really important question. So I'll share the perspective of engaging students and campus stakeholders more broadly, since that's the focus of our work. So let me start actually by saying that our coalition, I mentioned resources, because we have a ton, but we actually have a resource for this purpose. We call them our student vote starter packs, because we know that student leaders, campus staff members, faculty, nonprofit partners, like Legal Women Voter chapters, all have their own kind of questions and require tailored solutions. And so anyone interested in getting involved in this work can use these student vote starter packs as guides to navigate recommendations that are based on common questions that we get from different types of partners. I can put it in the chat, and I think Nile might be able to put it on the Facebook, or if not, I'm not sure.
If you send it to me, I will send it to.
Okay, and I'll say this too. You can go to our website, which is sosvcoalition.org, and all of the resources that I've been talking about are there as well. So yeah, so share that resource, because that's something that you can kind of go back and review as you're kind of getting started in your work and engaging young voters on college campuses. But what kind of overview some of the recommendations in there is, one, I recommend gaining a deeper understanding of the national student vote landscape. There are a lot of places that you can do that. Circle, there are places on our website that you can kind of really get a feel and understanding of what's happening in the national student vote space. That's really key and important context. What you'll see there, something that's really exciting that I like to share with folks, is that the 2020 National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement shows that the student vote has increased dramatically across the country. We're waiting on our more recent data, but this is the data we have right now. And the national average student voting rate is up 14 percentage points from 2016 at 66%, which is just 1 point shy of the overall turnout in 2020 elections. And so that's really exciting, because it shows that local leaders like you all that are on this call right now, the kind of change that you all are creating across the country, and what we can continue to do. The second thing I would suggest is familiarize yourself with like the strategies and theories of change that our movement has been working hard in collaboration with one another to develop, so that partners like you all can have something to guide them. If you have questions about this, or you want guidance on what strategies to start with, please reach out. My email is very simple. It's bianca@sosvcoalition.org. But yeah, like I said, we have tons of resources. I would recommend starting with our SOSV checklist for institutionalizing voter engagement for the long run. It's a very simple way of kind of help understand what our approach is. And then you all mentioned kind of going back to the relational organizing piece and connecting with the campus stakeholders like students on the ground. I recommend finding and joining a campus vote coalition. Campus voting coalitions are important for countless reasons. One, for those of you who may be familiar with the Online Campus Democracy Challenge, they have a report that shared that campuses that develop action plans, civic engagement action plans, essentially their plan for how they're going to turn out the vote, engage students in our democracy, they have higher voting rates. And guess what? Campus voting coalitions are where those action plans are developed and executed. I'm sure Jada has experience with this as well. And so additionally, by joining a campus voting coalition, you can not only network with other nonprofits that are also supporting the students' work, but get in-depth knowledge of what that campus is doing to turn out their students, and be able to find and create opportunities to directly engage or help lead those campus efforts, and be able to contribute to the action plans and strategy for turning out the vote. What you'll see is that like student voters and through these campus voting coalitions, they have amazing ideas and they're working really, really hard. And they know what they're doing, but they need resources and they need support. And that's when nonprofit partners like you all come in, because you can provide that those gaps of like support that they're missing to be able to do their work. And so if you only remember one thing from that, it's this: anytime you're engaging campuses to support their work, make sure that you ask. And this is kind of in theme with what Jada and Van were sharing. You want to ask what campus leaders, what will actually be helpful. Don't assume, right? We talked about that earlier. Don't assume what they know or don't know. Don't assume what help they need, right? And trust them and work alongside them, because they're already doing great work, but like I mentioned earlier, could benefit from the resources and support that you all have to offer to continue their student voter engagement efforts. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And before we close out, we're not closing out yet. I'm just letting you know that we have a couple of questions SLSB focused about for them to you. But kind of going back to this kind of broader conversation we're trying to have, one of the questions that we got that I think is really interesting is there were leagues and just organizations in general who are trying to reach working class 18 to 30-year-olds, and not necessarily those within a higher education space, as is kind of emphasized in SLSB. So I don't know, Van, if you would maybe want to speak to that, since I believe Young Invincibles has that kind of broader reach in terms of who you're trying to communicate with.
Yeah, so that really deals with kind of like our work, as I previously mentioned, around Story Hub, but just engaging the community in general. So we are focused on individuals in various tracks of life. So not all those that go to college, people go to community college or choose the more non-traditional route as well. That's why we also focus on various aspects of workforce development and what that means as far as like apprenticeship and training. But that really focuses or with that demographic, they've really been keen on kind of like pathways to opportunity and economic mobility. So what are we doing in providing them job training and credentialing that will allow them opportunities for to have a sustainable wage in life and to be able to move up the ladder and actually make money that can give them a livable wage. So those are some of the things that those are some of the issues we focused on that has allowed us to have discussion and kind of mobilize them around the importance of voting and then how it impacts them. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's coming up is the reauthorization of WIOA that directly affects people's economic mobility in various parts of the country. And people understanding what does that mean? It means job training on, you hear about all these cranes and planes in various parts of the country as far as buildings being built. Well, who's going to build them? Who's going to lay the pipelines and the highways? Who's going to build the broadband of tomorrow? Who is going to do all that? Well, if you aren't trained to do it, then you won't be able to participate in that economy. And I think that understanding that issue and then how it directly impacts them is how we really talk to this demographic and understanding kind of what they need, but also stuff around like healthcare, access to healthcare, insurance, ACA. What does that mean for them? Open enrollment. How can they get on it? How does it affect them? These are things that we lean into, and then we make sure they understand the importance of voting and what that means for them, particularly in their state, since ACA, basically I think the Medicaid part of ACA is expanded by the state. So you need to have your state legislators, you need to have your governor involved, and if you don't vote in your state local elections, that will impact it.
No, one thing that I talk about a lot, well, thanks for great remarks, Van, is that I'm very big on decolonizing the type of young people we view as being leaders and where we put our investments, right? Because I think that oftentimes replicates classism, racism, things of that nature. So I do think that, especially at that league level, getting into labor union spaces, getting into other spaces where we're finding young people who are going kind of directly into that working space is going to be really important to make sure that, we're bringing a representative demographic into our representative democracy work. So going into one of the other questions that I have, it kind of shifts again to more of the digital perspective because I'm trying to close this out on a cohesive note. Is the question is, do you recommend older folks to get familiar with and start using contemporary social media so they can understand what younger people are often experiencing? So I'd love to hear a take on that.
That is such an interesting question because it's not one that I've thought about in those kinds of terms before. I think I would lean toward yes. Once again, have not thought about it until you just asked the question, Nile. So take this with a grain of salt. But I think that there are always going to be different things that digital natives are going to be experiencing and understanding versus someone who is sort of learning the tech space within a broader context of their life. I've never known what it's like to live without technology. And because of that, it comes a little bit easier to me. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for someone to understand. I mean, the issues surrounding misinformation, I think, are really prevalent. I think issues around, that's the one that's mainly coming to mind. I guess what I'm trying to say with that is not that, you can't understand every single thing that young people are experiencing, but more just that some things would be irrelevant to you. Like cyberbullying is probably not going to be as affecting you as it would a high school, college student. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I have a unique perspective on it because I remember when MySpace was popular and Facebook started, and Instagram was like, "Why are you on that?" So like my perception of like social media is a bit different, but I encourage people who are not on social media platforms to get on them, if only to understand what is being looked at and how are messages being communicated. And what I mean by messages, you have like you said, cyberbullying. What does that mean? What does that look like? If you don't understand cyberbullying, if you don't understand that people in your class may post a picture of you and then you'll get 1,000 messages on it or comments on it or nasty comments on it, then you can't talk to me about what it means to be cyberbullied. You have no perception of it. So until you're involved and you see, oh, I see how this can kind of go left real quick, you can't explain or discuss that issue. So just get involved, see what it looks like. Now you have everybody from a previous generation on Facebook, and they're like, oh man, this is cool. Well, as that wave continues to trickle down and you get involved in these other things, then you can kind of understand this is how messages and people are interacting. These are the issues or problems. So Jada brought up misinformation. There's a whole aspect of AI and misinformation that is being brought up about how to convey that. So until you're involved with it, until you touch it, you might not understand it.
No, the thing I always make this joke is that, as an older Gen Z, we're starting to get to this place where I kind of am losing the joke in the landscape. I'm like, okay, I'm trying to rock. But yeah, I think that that's super important. And I feel like it's the same as any other type of work. It's market research. And I think what's really a big thing that I emphasize in terms of how I think a lot of younger voters and just young people broadly kind of consume media is typically, especially when we're talking about television or other forms of traditional media, it's like if you're talking about politics, you're going to a political space. So I'm watching CNN, Fox News, so on and so forth. I'm going there, and then my entertainment is somewhere else. I think the whole cultural movement of social media is melding that. It's opinion work, it's political advocacy, but it's also humor. It's also different forms of engagement, right? So kind of having these types of marketplaces where all of this is conjoined and some content is both political advocacy and humor and all those types of things. Micro influencers, and so it's not just waiting for Chris Martin or someone else to tell you what to do. It's just a guy from Nevada who's funny, right? So there are all these really unique dimensions when it comes to social media. So I think even if it's just to understand like your younger cousins or grandchildren better, get on it. I just think it's helpful to know and allows you to kind of get a better pulse of where we are societally. But so as promised, Bianca, I have like 8 SLSD questions. So I'm just gonna rapid fire. I was being hyperbolic, just 3, but that's still a lot, right? So I was just gonna rapid fire some of the questions we got. So one is, how does SLSD determine which campuses to connect with?
Great question. So we are focused on all campuses. Well, okay, let me back up. All campuses are welcome and all campuses are important, but we have a particular focus on campuses that serve disenfranchised communities or communities that are historically not represented in our democracy. So that's campuses in the South, that's community colleges, that's HBCUs, that's MSIs, that's rural serving institutions. We have a strategy and goals that are like focused on reaching those campuses because those are the campuses that are serving students and communities that are often not represented in our democracy. So I'll say that.
Leading into that, I'm sure that you're going to just drop a link, but they also want to know, is there a list of colleges and universities that SLSD is working with?
We do. In fact, I can put it on in the chat, but we have a partner directory. and you'll see not just the campuses, but the nonprofits. What I will say is that there are we have some campus partners that are direct partners in the coalition, and then we have nonprofits that organize on college campuses. And so through our partners, we have reach on over 800 campuses across the country.
Wonderful. And then this is my last question. This is more of a ballpark, so I don't expect you to know this one, but if you know it, that's always helpful, right? Are any New Mexico schools a member of the coalition you represent? Is New Mexico, is there any New Mexican schools that are a member of the coalitions you represent? And you might be like, check the list.
Yeah, it's funny, probably, but I don't know off the top of my head. Like I said, I recommend checking out our partner directory. And if there isn't, and you are a chapter in New Mexico, then let's talk, because I would love to connect with you and bring you into the work that we're doing.
I appreciate it. And, as we're closing out, I want to thank all of you again for being here, for lending your voices, your experiences. It's always wonderful to be in conversation with our fellow allies in democracy. I would love to hear if there are any final thoughts, like if you had to give a leaguer one point of advice that would be a net positive for their young voter work, what do they need to know? I'll start with Jada, and then we'll work back around.
Mine would be, don't be afraid to be boots on the ground and be involved and contact students who are passionate directly, because there are students and there are young people who will want to get involved with you if only you give them the opportunity.
Thank you. Van?
Get involved early. And just remain engaged. Like, that's the main thing that I can say about just being involved in politics. Get involved with the population and people early. Talk to them, get to know them, learn their issues, listen to them.
Thank you. And Bianca?
I think it's just emphasized what we were talking about earlier, which is not assuming, but asking, and building those genuine relationships, because young people and students can tell when you just care about them casting a ballot for the candidate that you want, or that you care about their voice. So be genuine, and year round. It matters at any point, whether it's presidential election or a local election. So
the big thing I always talk about, that's how I keep introing all of my thoughts. I got to get a different phrase, but but if not even just for young voters, but for all communities, especially marginalized and underrepresented in political communities. If I only hear about you 10 days before your primary and then nothing after, then I think people are actually much better at reading disingenuous investments than I think political institutions give them credit for. So people know when you're here for the season versus when you're here for them. And if you're able to delineate that and emphasize that this is a genuine outreach, I am either a member of or an ally of your community, then I think that allows you to open a lot more doors that I think more partisan and more, I think, performative political work just is unable to. But yeah, I want to thank each of you again for joining us, Bianca, Jada, Van, and this is an important conversation. I hope the leagues continue to have it on their own and that we get to work with all of you in the future. But, as we close out, I'd love to hand it off again to our LWVUS board president, Sonia.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to, reiterate exactly what Nile said. Thank you so much for joining all of us, and really for the amazing insights that you all provided. Learning is both bi-directional or multi-directional, right? We all learn from each other. So the insights that you provided are incredibly valuable, and we look forward to working and collaborating and moving our democracy forward together. So thank you so much, and thanks for everyone who joined us this morning to celebrate the League's 104th birthday. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.